eye towards what? What is it you're striving for?
I'm kind of into this sort of flattening thing, this sort of, I don't know if it's like, I don't know whether the color is driving, it's almost kind of like the compositions are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, this particular picture was sort of it's another sort of, it has a lot of desperation moments,
In what
technically.
sense?
Well, this was photographed in Greece. You'd think you have a multitude of choices of places to photograph, but they're just very thick walls and very sort of small windows, and it was just sort of very kind of difficult to kind of deal with some of these lighting situations. So this was photographed outdoors, and there's literally just open sky, kind of flooding down on this on this sort of scene against a stucco wall, which was a particular texture that I really was not interested in. I just didn't. I was very frustrated with that. I didn't have any kind of flat surfaces to kind of photograph on it, so I found these 9 by 12 marble slabs,
Yeah.
and they're on a bunch of milk crates underneath. There's just a lot
And
going.
see, we'd never know that.
No, I mean it's
Yeah.
just sort of. So I kind of like I'm looking at this whole scene, going, "What a mess!" Like this is really a disaster, and these pumpkin pieces. You go to the markets there, and there's just some woman sitting there, and that's all she has is this one big, huge crater of a pumpkin that when someone wants a certain amount, she just hacks it off, and so that's completely her thing, that these big chunks of pumpkin. And then the fish heads are, I really was preparing the fish, and the fish heads were kind of cut off in this little pile on this piece of paper, and that itself kind of looked fantastic. And so, I kind of ran out and reshot it and, went back to cooking, but it, I don't know.
So you haven't
There's a lot going.
You haven't completely abandoned your love of cooking.
Oh no, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's anything I got from cooking in restaurants I'm really happy that I know how to cook. I mean, I'm not a great cook, but I like to eat.
You can cook
good
fancy.
food.
You can cook fancy.
I like good food,
Yeah. Okay. So shall we look at some more from the
Sure.
recent work?
And those are the fish. Those are the fish. They're there.
Before you cut the heads off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And are these two different walls then?
yeah,
inside?
that
Yeah.
the yellow squash, that was sort of an old wooden tray that I had that just really was this kind of extraordinary kind of orange red, really beautiful red, and in my frustration with the whole sort of digital thing and working kind of with the computers and stuff like that, I finally kind of I just finally had to kind of bring the tray in and say, this is the color. It's like, do not be afraid of this color. This is what it is, and it's kind of the same with the the 5 fish on the left. I mean, as I was kind of working with those fish and that whole composition is really, in the end, kind of a little tribute to Irving Penn did a photograph in like 1939, and it's this beautiful little photograph of I don't know, there's like 1,000 sardines that kind of make up this little fish. That it was just, and it was just as I was doing that, it kind of triggered that kind of whole thing. But again, the lighting situation is very flat. I'm shooting from kind of more above. I think before I was shooting more down at kind of table level, and that's one of those marble slabs. It's a junky piece of linoleum that I found that just had that kind of very beautiful green, and just cleaning it up. I don't know. Just a little conversation that they're having. I had done these marble slab photographs also with the intent of joining them sort of as a big, long, rambling kind of still life. And there were, this was in '07, so I mean, I still had some Polaroid film, and so I was kind of previewing some of this stuff, and I was kind of constructing those Polaroids to kind of see if I could really kind of build these things as one great big rambling, slabs of marble and stuff like that. But they became sort of more independent pictures. And, again, this sort of plastic bag, this is just, I don't know, it's sort of plastic bags at, even at the Greek markets or Tongan markets, it's just sort of the prevalent little display thing that, everything's in plastic.
And is this another tray then that you're using in the?
This was in Italy, again, and I mean, the only thing I could really, that piece of cheese. I mean, one of the things about it's kind of like the pumpkin and I'm having the memory of that woman how she was selling that pumpkin. It's like, you go to a cheese place in Italy and it's like, I could never cut the cheese quite as well as that piece is cut right there. And so can I please have that piece, And so, I don't know, everything just always looked more beautiful in Italy, food-wise,
And then this is the final frame now where we have two very recent works, and you're veering off in two different directions at the moment. Let's tell us just briefly about each one.
Well, the portrait on the right is of Charles. He's just he's someone who I had got to know in New Orleans. He's a photographer. His name is Charles Latham, and I just really, really love his work. A lot of it is sort of autobiographical. He's gay, and he has his work is a lot about his sort of interaction with a lot of his sort of gay friends who are also very heavy-set men, and they're really into eating and being full-bodied and all that, and that's what his photographs are sort of about. And I kind of I think as a person, I just really liked him and I loved his work, that I just wanted to have a portrait of him anyway. So I asked him to sit for me. And, at one point he was changing his shirt and I just asked him if I could just take one without his shirt. And I don't know, there's really nothing to be said about it, except that I just really love this portrait.
Well, tell us a little bit about what's going on with that collage.
Well, the collage thing was just sort of a technical thing. I mean, I cannot print any bigger than 20 by 24 in my darkroom, and I really wanted a life-size portrait. And so I basically threw the enlarger up as high as it could go, and I just laid out a bunch of paper and exposed it all, put it back together, and then I exposed even more paper and built up the picture. Like that's actually, the negative is actually square.
So it seems like there's almost a conceptual relationship between this, what you're talking about is this full body aesthetic and wanting the full photograph to reflect that by being
I
larger.
wanted him to be in a bigger space and this whole thing. So I exposed extra paper to kind of like sort of build out that whole thing. And everything just started reminding me of kind of digital photography and like that I was kind of like, I mean, I could have done all of that digitally, but in a way I sort of felt like it was kind of this nice texture, I think, to the kind of collage. And they're kind of like these sort of big fractals, everything kind of, the language started kind of infiltrating kind of just this, and it was just very much more tactile for me to kind of piece it back together. And it's just something I kind of really enjoyed doing. And then on the left, I think it just, I feel like it's kind of a cleansing of a lot of those other images in terms of just that tabletop and that background and the objects, and really reducing kind of, almost like eliminating all shadow and just letting kind of the shape of the object and the color of the object be kind of the main sort of focus, and let things kind of float on these. I don't know. I'm just liking the effect of it. It's a beautiful old piece of wallpaper. It's actually kind of a rag rug print wallpaper that's probably about a 1900. It's from out of a very old house in Nantucket, and it just, a lot of the images that I'm working on right now are sort of stem from this picture, this kind of very simplified. I mean, there's other images where the objects are all below the horizon, or we're most, so it's kind of moving things around and being a little bit more.
So the horizon is actually an element that is dictating your composition.
Yeah, yeah, and how things kind of relate to that. And, and it's also kind of leading me into this idea of, I post-Katrina, a lot of stuff got thrown out into the streets. And one of the things that I picked up off the street was a big old museum poster of a Matisse cutout,
Right.
one of his cutouts. And that's been hanging. And the picture on the left is like kind of really starting to kind of just sort of remind me of this particular image and this idea of the cutout. And so I'm kind of playing with, taking these digital prints and cutting them up and reconstructing them and sort of playing with them that way. It's just sort of kind of wanting to kind of
Well, it seems
break
like
out of it a little bit.
in both instances, you're still very much oriented towards issues of composition. And in this instance, you're dealing with fragmentation and sort of repositioning and reconstructing and reconfiguring, which is clearly related to what we do with digital technology, yet you're not giving up the traditional component that's always been so much a part of your work.
Yeah,
So,
and there's other photographs that there's images I've made with that background, with a different piece of wallpaper that is it's damaged in certain spots that to me is very distracting and not part of it. And it's that whole idea of fixing that digitally, or shall I fix it? Shall I just cut out a piece of wallpaper from the other photograph and patch it and kind of, and start working with things that way to kind of sort of, make it more physical.
well, it's clear you haven't run out of ideas and you haven't run out of inspiration.
Games to play.
Games to play as an artist. So we look forward to seeing what comes next. But let's turn the lights up now and see if we have any questions from the audience. So anyone have a question? Katie has a microphone. Since we're recording, we'd like you to use the mic if you have something to ask. We have a question over here.
David, I see that you at some point became committed to a square format with a couple of exceptions in the still lifes. But even in the portraits, you don't use a portrait format, use a true square. And I was wondering if that stemmed from your early years with your mentor and the cutting board.
Maybe. I don't know. No, I think the square, most things that you see in the square situation, I think, are very kind of individual and very centrist, and it's the pure focus of the single person or object, whether it was the box series or those portraits. I think in the other, and then one of Charles, I think, is a much more traditional, maybe portrait rectangle. It's slightly wider than a 35 millimeter vertical, but I think the rectangle, it's more narrative. You're reading something. There's multiple things happening. There's sort of an exchange between the objects and left to right and top to bottom and stuff. So I think that it's what I'm photographing that kind of determines that. Yeah. I mean, I don't have any problem with cropping or making those sort of, my teacher in high school didn't, so, that just like.
Do we have any, yes, Richard?
On your Caravaggio-esque pieces, you didn't talk much about the light sources. Were they natural, artificial, or can you tell us more about that?
That's the thing that kind of, I think, binds them all. It's all natural light. It's, I think that's one of the things that I had such a hard time at Syracuse, because it was so sort of studio driven, and it was a lot of sort of learning how to do lighting and stuff like that. And I really just was, I just had no interest. Natural light was really kind of something that, it's something I'm challenged with all the time, but you might see something very beautiful, but you just don't photograph it because it's in the worst light that, you just can't do anything about it. But yeah, it's all window light.
Well, Joan, right next to Richard there, has a question.
I have a
Okay.
question. I noticed that most of the images are black and white. Do you have a preference for black and white or color?
I don't think so.
No, just
I don't
whatever
think
strikes
so.
your fancy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, I'm not so sure, like, if I, since Charles is sort of a new photograph, I don't see him in color, that particular one, so it doesn't, it's more monochromatic too. I mean, I think that, it's a very kind of, so I don't. And I'm seeing some of the, I mean, I photographed all that color stuff, that everything that's in there. I did everything in black and white as well. And I'm starting to look at that black and white now, which is almost 2 years later, and thinking that maybe, it has a life too that, might get
See
kind
the light
on-
of public
yeah,
eye.
Yeah.
Mhm. And another question coming up from the back. Okay.
I have a question about your Moscow demonstration. I know it's early in your career, but was that the photo you shot, or did you create the photo after you looked at it? That the lighting on the face,
Yeah, it's, no, I mean, that is the photo, that is the shot that I took. And, but yes, there, in that print, there is a slight vignetting. There's a slight kind of, just sort of bringing, those that are around him down in tonality and him kind of up a little bit. That kind of makes it obvious, I guess.
So you took what was there and you sort of enhanced it a little
Yeah,
bit. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Which we now call photoshopping.
Yeah, yeah. I know.
Any more questions for David? Well, thank you all for joining us today. David, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.